video, we're gonna talk about the process of selecting the appropriate pixel art style that you want to employ for your game or for the drawing that you're making, the collage, and so on. And always when you start, there are so many different possibilities. And then how do we choose the best one for your game and for your experiences and for your needs? Well, I mean, there is not a obvious answer to this. One thing is to experiment, to see what it's out there, to look at what are the best pixel art games and what people are interested in. Another important thing to consider is how large and detailed the assets that you're going to create are. So again, this depends, this is very closely connected to the third one, depending on the game genre. So for something, for example, as a side-scrolling brawler or a jump and run, where everything can be a bit zoomed out, maybe the main character, a lot of the items, a lot of the smaller backgrounds can be smaller with less details, but then you would have maybe bigger scenic things, bigger background props, and so on. While something like, let's say, a quest or an adventure game would require everything because it's so close in and you want to be able for users to be able to distinguish items, what they can interact with, and so on. You would want everything to be quite detailed. You would not want to skip a lot of stuff. But on the positive side, for quests and adventure games, there is not that much animation, which benefits us that. Another thing that we already discussed is the palette choices. What style does your game need to invoke? Does it want to be, do you want it to be something like a Game Boy Advance game where there is a limited number of colors, or even just an old Game Boy where it's not even colored? Or something like an Amiga, which is also very limited color scheme? Or do you want to do something modern where you don't care about the number of colors that you use as long as you show what you want to show? But let me give you some pointers, especially first for designing the baddies, the bad guys. One thing that I always try to do is to separate them in types. So large ones, small ones, something that, for example, the flying ones, the air ones, maybe there are some advanced ones, bosses, and so on. For example, here we have three different types of bad guys. Maybe this one is a brute, a stronger one. This one looks like a grunt, something that you would fight draws of. This is something, again, a grunt, something that you would be able to easily dispatch. So in these types of enemies that you would see a lot of, you would want to make it easy for people to understand what it is, make them easily separatable from one another. Of course, you can make variations by color swapping, so you can create different brutes, for example, some more powerful ones with blue coats or golden coats and so on. But try to make the different types of enemies separable. Make some base models. That is the next one. You can color swap them and you can put different ornamentation, you can put different heads and so on. But make a base model, you know, that something that would not change, and then you can create everything else out of that. Another thing is think of how they walk, attack, and jump. Do they need to jump? Do they need to duck? Or are they just gonna walk, and when they get to you, maybe just try to stab you or try to shoot you? Because it would be very different if, let's say, this grunt is needs to be just walking around at a slow pace, and then when it sees you, just tries to hit you with his big axe, because then you would need to put a lot more effort into the axe. Then the walking animation is going to be quite simpler. You would not have anything like running. But then if you have the grunt here being able to try to follow you, so it would be able to jump, to grab onto ledges and so on, you would want it to be every part of it, both hands and feet, and the head needs to be expressive enough and easy to draw enough. And of course, try to be consistent with their designs. One of the things that I've seen with Novice games and game concepts is that people tend to mix and match designs, mix and match pixel sizes. Maybe they saw a cool dragon that has a vibe of Final Fantasy, and then they combine it with something that looks like Hollow Knight, Knights, or like Shovel Knight. So it gets a bit of a mixed bag, and this kind of inconsistency would very much hurt the game. And we're talking about both the characters, the main character, the bad guys, but also the background and the foreground. One thing that I can show you here and what I'm talking about is how you can create a whole plethora of baddies by just color swapping them and being very, very specific with some of the details, because all of these, they're the same. The only thing that differentiates them is skin color, maybe a bit of facial animations or lack of any, and the weapons. Then, of course, one of the good things is that you can make some animation cycles, and then just change the color swaps on top of them. So you would have much less work to do and would be able to create much more varied enemies. And one of the things that players straight away see, especially if your game is a bit longer, is if everything starts to repeat very fast. And we can do the same for designing the hero. A hero especially needs to have some kind of standout feature, something that you would look at it and say, okay, that is the hero. That is not just a color swapped or palette swapped bad guy, but this is my main character. Another thing that you can also see from stuff like Kirby or Super Mario or Sonic is that it needs to be easy to understand which direction he or she is facing. Because if they are facing, if you don't know where the character is facing, then how would the players know if they try to jump that they're going to be able to jump the pit or just going to go back? So, and the third one is it needs to be able to stand out from the background. Again, that means that your background should not be needlessly busy, but on the other hand, you will also want the character itself to be differentiable enough from the background. Maybe if the character, for example, is something like this, the background would not contain these kind of greens and these kind of blues as much, because then the characters would just be indistinguishable. And I'll give you here some examples that I've created getting inspiration from different game styles. So this is a character that I envisioned for a beat 'em up, because you have you can do a lot of changes in the legs and the arms. You can make him be able to punch. You can make him be able to grab his sword and slash, or to kick. Everything is very pronounced in its limbs, and you can also make him change his expressions when he gets hit. When you want to do something like a jump and run, maybe you don't need that much expressiveness in the limbs. You can get away with a lot less. A character would be most probably zoomed out, but then you would need something to be a standout feature. And a lot of what a lot of good game designers have created, and I've tried to show you here, is the same as Super Mario. The head sometimes needs to be a bit bigger because the head is and the face is the first thing that a user would look at, would associate with the character. When you have something like a roguelike, you need to go even simpler because a roguelike can become very busy. If you have tens of hundreds of enemies going at you and you're shooting or slashing constantly, you don't want a character that would be very hard to distinguish. You will need to know that, okay, that my character is now holding his sword and is slashing, or my character is rolling to the side. So something very small, very much easier to understand, to know where it's pointed without too much detail. And again, for something like this, you don't want that much detail because roguelikes normally have a lot of movement options, a lot of spells, a lot of attacks. So everything that you need to animate, everything in that gets very complicated, very easy. On the end of the spectrum, you have quests. And quests can go in two directions. You can go with very simple but striking visuals, something like this, where a character maybe doesn't need to jump and run, but you can clearly see when he extends his hand to grab something, or when he's moving around and you know where he's looking, but the overall pace of the game is much slower. Another thing would be to go even more in detail and put even more emphasis on the character. Go in the direction of maybe something like Monkey Island, where Guybrush Threepwood is like very, very pronounced, very. You can straight away know that that is the main character, even if he's walking around and interacting with other characters. Here, this has been inspired by Sword and Sorcery, which has a very much more minimalistic art style, where the beauty of the game comes from the post-processing touches and the little touches that you can actually create when your characters are a bit more simplistic. Again, as part of the materials provided for these course, I would have all these seven different sprites that you can use. You can freely use them. You can animate them. You can use them as a basis to change. I have one quite close up on the face. You can change the face. You can make it, less ugly if you want. If you want to create something like a Final Fantasy game, or a game that you also have close-ups of characters' portraits when they're talking. And that's about it. The next thing that you can do after watching these videos is just jump in and try to do something by yourselves. Try to change up some stuff, try to draw some ideas, get a feeling of it.